Well, we're going to start today, Alyssa, with a question that came in recently over an email from a supervisor who's in a new role. And when she came into this role, she made a pretty big change in her life. Tammy in Virginia emailed and asked me about feeling lost with new supervisors in a new role after almost 25 years in a prior role. And what she basically said is, I feel overwhelmed, and my supervisors are great and everybody's been really accommodating, but I just feel like I'm having a hard time getting up to speed. I feel like I'm having a hard time getting all the training that I need to be successful. And while she has asked for help, she feels like she doesn't want to ask for help too often. Otherwise, she would be seen as unqualified or maybe not adapting to the position. And so we had an email exchange a little bit, and I think this particular kind of question is something that a lot of supervisors struggle with, whether you're new to leadership or maybe you've moved into a different role or you've changed organizations or maybe you've moved from one kind of industry to another after a long time. And so I thought I would tap into the coach in you and ask you a little bit about where you would start with somebody who has these kinds of struggles.
So the first things that generally come up for me in trying to understand where this feeling of lostness is what is the definition of found, right? She obviously came from a situation in which she felt like she was an expert. She had a certain level of, high level of experience in that environment. And so we first have to say, what is truly the expectations that we're holding? And that's twofold. One, what are the expectations that we're holding for ourselves? And then the other side of that is, what is the reality of the expectations that the job has of us? Because inevitably, we are our own worst critic, and we think that we should be the expert day two of the new job, right? Because I have so much experience, I have this, I have that, but it's a completely different environment. These are completely other new humans that you have to learn, and that takes time.
Absolutely.
It takes time. So what do you think is the answer or the strategy that we should try to coach supervisors towards in these kinds of new transitions?
Well, you nailed the first one, I think, which is how do we calibrate our expectations in the early stages of any new job? Even if someone is listening to this and they're not a supervisor, I have been known to describe taking a new job, leadership role or not, as going back to stupid. Right? In whatever previous job you had, you probably had insight and experience under your belt. You knew intricate details. You knew who to call for what. You knew the politics and the personalities of the people around you. And when you step into a new job, you have none of that. And so the first few months in any new role can be stressful and exhausting for that very reason. And now you add into it that you're trying to make a good impression on your team. You're trying to make a good impression on your new bosses. You know that there's kind of this window of time to get people to perceive you as competent and trustworthy and caring, and you know that if you start off on the wrong foot, that you could be trying to climb out of a hole you've dug for yourself. So you could put a lot of pressure on yourself as a leader. But you're right, the only cure is time. At first, we have to give ourselves grace and continue reminding ourselves that we're capable and that we are going to get more comfortable with each passing day. And I don't think if we can commit to that the feeling will last for very long. But at the same time, I also think, and this would be the second thing I would be coaching around, is where does that feeling come from that there is a negative consequence to asking for help too often when you're new? I think that, I mean, I get it, but I think sometimes we have to talk ourselves out of that, right?
There's only this one allotment of help that we're allowed, right? And somehow by asking the 3 questions or asking for that one other thing, we have filled it already to capacity within the first, month on the job. No.
Right.
as you evolve, you learn what you don't know. So it's incumbent upon us to continually have that self-awareness as to what we need to grow and learn, and then check that against, again, expectations, our own and the actual organizational expectations, to then say, okay, what are the resources that I have the availability for? What is on the future? What have I already learned that maybe I'm not giving myself credit for mentally, internally, that I can draw upon too. So, it's this thing of scarcity. I think too is that there's only so much, and you don't want to take it away from someone else. But in some circumstances, that has been the reality of training and development, right? I think that we got that honestly in some organizations, at least I did. But the other part of that, the flip side, is that if that is the organization that you find yourself in, where there is this finite amount of resources
Yes.
or development that they're going to allow you to have,
Yeah.
better to learn sooner than later.
Right. And the problem isn't you, right? It's probably
That's right.
unrealistic. If it feels like, okay, I get 12 questions, right? I got a dozen tokens that I can use before people are going to start to question my competence. That's particularly unfair. And if we spot that in a new role, we have to do the hard work of saying, you know what? This is not me. I am capable. I'm asking the right questions. Why is the culture here maybe not as supportive as it could be? I think the truth is that in most places, you get what I call new guy immunity for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
I think you get it for up to a year when you're in a new role. And if you ask people how long does it take to adapt to a new role and to really fully step into it, I don't think you can say at a minimum anything less than a year, because workplaces have cycles. And if you get hired in November, 10 months later, you might know a lot, but you still never experienced an October.
Yeah.
And different things happen at different points in the calendar, and we have to be able to give voice to that if we're feeling pressure by people around us that, hey, if you're getting feedback that you're not adapting as quickly as they'd like, then we need to probe and ask for more specific examples, and then maybe more specific support to get there. If we have to ask for training, if we have to ask for time, those are reasonable requests for anyone who is still in that first year, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That the fear, I think, or the of us asking comes from a different place than what we most likely want to admit. Is that truly like about fear that we're not good enough for that job,
Mm,
fear that we don't truly have, what it takes, the whole imposter syndrome that is
yes.
so rampant, that every level of person on the planet still deals with in some form or fashion. So I think, also trying to do some self work around what is that fear for me personally, trying to take a little deeper dive in curiosity for yourself as to what's behind that fear.
And I think if we also stop and ask ourselves, when people ask questions, and in particular, a lot of questions, in an effort to try to know and understand, what's the result? How do people experience that? In most cases, it's not experienced as a character flaw. It's not a defect. In most cases, I think people will see someone who is determined and who is dedicated to getting it right. And this is actually what I told her in the email that I wrote back to her, because I know the folks who are over top of her in this particular organization. And I just tried to reassure her that what I know about them as leaders is that they want her to ask for help often, and they want her to ask for more training if she needs it, and that they picked her because they thought she was capable, because they thought her values and her traits would be a good fit for the organization, and they can teach her everything else that she needs to know to be successful in the role. And so to not be afraid to ask for help, because other people will see she cares, she's invested. And I think the same thing is true, not just asking for help up to the people that supervise us, but the people that we're supervising. I think when we're a new leader, if we have an experienced team underneath us, we can ask them, hey, help me understand. I want to know why this is the way that it is. I want to make sure that I'm really absorbing as much as I can. And when my boss comes to me and says, hey, can you help me understand this better? That's actually empowering for me too. So you get a lot of good stuff actually going in the workplace when you as a leader aren't afraid to ask questions, when you aren't afraid to say, I don't know. The leader that is able to say, I don't know, is taking that first step into the very vulnerability that we know is so key to leadership.
Absolutely. And look what she did. She took that first step in vulnerability for herself by saying, I feel lost.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure of my footing, of where I stand. And here's what my fears are. So kudos. You're already succeeding at this role. You're doing it. The self-awareness is there.
I think we can call her a boss hero.
Yes, abso-freaking-lutely.
And we define it as someone who cares enough to strive daily to create the conditions for their people to thrive, but doesn't always know how. And that's exactly what she's raising her hand to say. I care about doing a really good job because of the people who hired me for this organization and for the people in my charge, but I don't feel like I'm there yet and I need help. It's the very definition of being a boss hero.
Yeah.
Way to go, Tammy.
And I think, too, if I could also include in there, we do all of those things for ourselves, too. It's not being a boss has to also encompass wanting and caring for ourselves and making sure that we have that environment for ourselves, too. So that takes a lot of hard vulnerability and courage. So,
and only when we do that can we actually show up as the best kind of boss. Right? And be at our best for people.